Wait, just $20,000 for our honeymoon? Isn't that a bit low? Matthew's voice cut through the quiet living room, filled with frustration. Exactly, Mom. Jeannie, his wife, chimed in without hesitation, her sharp tone filled with impatience. Think this through. This is a celebration for your only son. If you can't give more, maybe we should just cut ties. Shelley felt a lump forming in her throat, disbelief coursing through her. She had given everything to her children, but in this moment, her son and daughter-in-law's sense of entitlement left her speechless. Fine, she said after a pause, her voice quieter than she had intended. Let's cut ties then. As the words left her mouth, she thought back to how things had gotten to this point. Her name was Shelley, and she had raised her two children mostly on her own. Her husband had passed away when their daughter, Selena, was in college, and their son, Matthew, was just starting middle school. It had been a devastating time for all of them, but somehow, Shelley had managed to keep the family together. Selena, always the responsible one, had offered to leave her far-off college to help her mother after the tragedy. Shelley had refused. She wanted her daughter to finish her education and live her life, despite the hardships they were facing. In time, Selena graduated, got a job, met someone special, and eventually married. Now she had a child of her own. Matthew had been more of a challenge. Losing his father during his rebellious teenage years had been tough on him, but Shelley had done her best to raise him alone. He went to private schools and attended a good college, both of which had been financially difficult for Shelley, but she had made it work. She had hoped that in the end, he'd turn out just fine. Mom, my job is close to home, Matthew had told her when he first got hired. We can live together until I get transferred. I know you worry, but don't. That's nice, she had replied, smiling warmly at him. But don't push yourself too hard. Your happiness is what matters to me. Matthew had always been considerate. Shelley had tried not to spoil him as a child, and she had taught him to do his share of chores around the house. He had been her pride and joy, a son she had hoped would be as supportive to his future wife as he had been to her. Shelley had thought she had done a good job. She saw Selena and Matthew from time to time, and though life wasn't perfect, she was content. She had always believed that once children got married, there wasn't much a parent could do but step back and hope for the best. That's what she had discussed with her friends. Shelley had always known that interfering too much in her children's marriages would make her the kind of mother-in-law she had never wanted to be. She had accepted that times had changed. But still, a parent's heart wanted to help. For Selena's wedding, Shelley had given her daughter $20,000 as a gift, plus another $20,000 for the honeymoon. Are you sure, Mom? Selena had asked, clearly concerned. You've saved so much. You don't have to do this. We'll be fine without it. It's fine, sweetheart, Shelley had reassured her. If you don't need it, just save it. I've got enough saved for myself, don't worry about me. Selena had been grateful, bringing back thoughtful souvenirs from her honeymoon and telling Shelley all about the trip. The entire experience had been heartwarming, and Shelley had felt proud that she could give her daughter such a gift. She had expected to do the same for Matthew, but when the time came to give him and Jeannie their wedding and honeymoon money, the reaction was drastically different. Wait, this is it? Matthew had said, staring at the check in disbelief. This isn't enough. Our wedding cost $60,000, and you're only giving us $20,000 for the honeymoon? Seriously, Mom? Exactly, Jeannie added, crossing her arms as if Shelley had insulted them. What are you thinking? This isn't anywhere near enough. Don't act like you're some great parent with this measly amount. Shelley had been stunned. I'm sorry, but this is all I can afford, she had replied, trying to keep her voice calm. You said you had savings for the wedding, right? Matthew had scoffed. Savings? What young people these days have savings? We're always paying for everything, rent, bills, and supporting the elderly on top of that. Haven't you seen the news, Mom? We're the ones struggling here. I understand, Shelley had replied, feeling the weight of his words, but I did my best for both of you. It's not like I didn't help. Jeannie's eyes filled with exaggerated tears. How could you say that? A wedding is a woman's lifelong dream. It's the one day I get to be the star of the show, and you couldn't even support us properly. She sniffled dramatically, as if Shelley had wronged her in the worst possible way. Shelley felt a knot tighten in her chest. "That's not what I meant," she stammered. Azrenia, but Matthew jumped to Jeannie's defense immediately. "Mom, do you even care about us?" he snapped. "Are you saying my parents-in-law should also be contributing more? That's ridiculous. It's your job as the groom's parent to handle everything." Shelley had never felt more hurt. Matthew's accusations felt like daggers to her heart. "I've never exploited you," she said, trying to reason with him. "I haven't taken any money from you since you started working, and I've always respected how you manage your own finances. You don't even contribute to the household bills." "That's because I was spending it on things I enjoy," Matthew replied, his tone dismissive. "Eating out with friends and going for drinks doesn't cost that much, and don't pretend you're struggling, Mom. I've seen all the fancy appliances you have at home." "Those were gifts from Selena," Shelley said softly, but her words were ignored. "Poor Matthew," Jeannie said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "stuck living with a mother who's taking advantage of him, all because he's kind enough to stay with her." Shelley's heart broke at that moment. She had never asked Matthew for anything. If anything, she had gone out of her way to make sure he had everything he needed while he lived at home. Many of her friends took living expenses from their children who were still under their roof, but Shelley had never done that. She had managed on her own, even though it hadn't been easy. Now, hearing them twist the truth like this made her wonder if everything she had done had been in vain. But the final blow came when Jeannie, with a cruel smirk, said, "Maybe you should apologize to me, Mom. You're clearly in the wrong here. Show us you're sorry by giving us more money. You're always talking about how precious Matthew is to you, right?" Matthew stood beside his wife, his arm around her shoulders, smiling as if they had won some kind of victory. Shelley felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "I've given as much as I could afford," she said, her voice trembling. "And now you want me to give even more? I don't understand." But before she could finish, Matthew and Jeannie left, leaving Shelley alone in the quiet of her home, disappointment weighing heavily on her. She had thought she had done her best. She had believed she had raised her son well. Yet here she was, being told by her own child that she had failed him. A few days later, Matthew and Jeannie returned, but there was no hint of remorse in their demeanor. They sat down at the living room table, looking smug and self-assured. "So, have you thought about it?" Jeannie asked, her eyes gleaming with greed. "How much more are you going to give us? Because honestly, our relationship depends on it. If we can't rely on you, then what's the point?" Shelley took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. "I understand how you feel," she said calmly. "But I can't give you any more money. In fact, I don't even feel like giving you the $20,000 I originally promised." Both Matthew and Jeannie stared at her, their smug expressions vanishing in an instant. "What? Mom? What are you saying?" Matthew stammered. "That's fine," Jeannie spat, her face turning red with anger. "We can just cut ties then, right? Isn't that what you wanted?" Shelley nodded, her voice steady as she replied, "Yes. Let's cut ties." The shock on their faces was palpable. They hadn't expected her to agree. Just as they were about to protest, another voice filled the room. "I've been listening this whole time." Selena stepped out from the room behind Shelley, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "You two are absolutely awful." "Sis?" Matthew stuttered, clearly caught off guard. "What are you doing here?" "Enough with the fake surprise," Selena shot back, her voice dripping with frustration. "Aren't you grateful for anything? Especially you, Matthew. Mom has supported you through everything, through your rebellious teenage years, through private school, even letting you live here rent-free as an adult. What's with your attitude?" "She's my mom," Matthew retorted defensively. "That's her job. And I've seen online that other parents give way more than she's giving us." "Exactly," Jeannie chimed in. "It's the groom's parents who should be paying for everything. And if they don't, they shouldn't expect to see their grandchildren." Selena's face hardened. "Well, Jeannie, I wouldn't want to see any child raised by someone as unreasonable as you two." "What?" Jeannie gasped. "Even if we have kids, you'd still feel that way?" "Absolutely," Selena replied, her voice cold. I wouldn't want to be associated with people like you. Matthew and Jeannie exchanged nervous glances. Let's go, Jeannie muttered, grabbing Matthew's arm. There's no talking to these people. Without another word, they left, slamming the door behind them. The silence that followed felt heavy, but also liberating. Shelley and Selena looked at each other, both letting out deep sighs of relief. I'm sorry you had to hear all that, Shelley said quietly. Selena smiled gently. It's okay, Mom. You've done more than enough. Life returned to a peaceful rhythm after that, at least for a while. But a few months later, Shelley received a phone call from Matthew. His voice was shaky, almost desperate. Mom, help me, he sobbed. I don't know what happened, but I'm out of money. I can't pay my bills. My electricity's getting shut off and I'm behind on rent. I'm going to get evicted. Please, Mom, I need help. Shelley felt a pang of sadness, but also a deep weariness. What happened to all the money you had? She asked, already suspecting the answer. Matthew explained that he and Jeannie had been spending their salaries freely, without any thought to their future expenses. I never had to worry about bills when I lived with you, Matthew said, his voice filled with disbelief. Why is it so hard now? You never thought about it because I was paying for everything, Shelley said, feeling drained. You've been living like you're still a child, but now you're an adult, Matthew, and adults have responsibilities. Matthew was silent for a moment. But Mom, if you give me that $20,000, I can fix everything. Please, just give me one more chance. Shelley closed her eyes, trying to hold back her tears. No, Matthew, she said firmly. I can't help you anymore. You're on your own now. Matthew's voice wavered. But Mom... Shelley took a deep breath and repeated, You're on your own. With that, she hung up the phone, her heart heavy but resolute. She knew this was the only way Matthew would ever learn. He kept calling, but Shelley ignored each one. She had to be firm. This was her final act as his mother. A few weeks later, Selena told Shelley that Matthew had blamed Jeannie for their financial troubles, and Jeannie had done the same to him. It wasn't long before they divorced, unable to cope with the reality they had created for themselves. Friends and family distanced themselves from the couple, calling them wedding gift thieves after the extravagant ceremony they couldn't afford. Shelley didn't know what happened to Matthew after that. He tried reaching out to Selena, but she had made it clear she wasn't interested in helping him either. As for Shelley, she was ready to move on. She was selling her house, which had become too big and empty for her to live in alone. With the money from the sale, she planned to buy a small condo in a senior community where she could live peacefully and independently for the rest of her life. And no, she had no intention of telling Matthew where she was moving. She had done everything she could as a mother, and now it was time for her to focus on her own happiness. This was her final act of love for her son. In the long run, it was